It was midday, and the sun beamed a shaft of light into the secluded Ancestor glade, illuminating the pale pink leaves of a canticle tree in full bloom. Dust motes and ancestor moths danced among the leaves, applicating in Magnus's divine radiance. With a mirthful grin, a wizened priest crossed the glade. Despite his blindness, he kept his footing, stepping adeptly over exposed roots and a trickling stream. He could not see the lambent performance of the 1,000 moths weaving through the buds and branches, but he could hear their almost imperceptible trill. He stepped up to the canticle bough, ran his hand along the bark, and took up the warbling mantra. There was a faint flurry in the air, and then he felt their bristly legs land on him, blanketing his entire body. The frequencies of their song synchronized, and suddenly the priest could see. Not the glade, nor the flutter of wings about his face. Those were still confined to the realms of sound and touch. What the priest could see was not tangible in the mortal sense, and were we to ask him what he could see, he would not be able to articulate it to us. Only those priests with illuminated understanding will ever grasp what it is the ancestors show them. But the profundity of such visions is a prize worthy of sacrificing one's eyesight. While most mortals react to what they see in the present, the blinded moth priests lay witness to events that have not yet occurred. They trade sight for foresight. This ethereal wisdom may manifest in the form of an Elder Scroll, and as a result, only the priests are equipped with the necessary expertise to interpret them. But even then, the scrolls are as elusive as a remembered dream. Should you wish to follow the path to priesthood, this is what the cult will tell you. The wisdom of the ancestors can sing the future into the present. For this reason, our order, and our order alone, has been given the privilege to interpret the Elder Scrolls. These writings exceed even the gods, both Aedra and Daedra. Such insight into the inner fabric of reality comes at a price. Each reading of the Elder Scrolls is more profound than the last. Each leaves the priest blind for longer and longer periods of time. Finally, the last reading achieves a nearly sublime understanding of that scroll's contents. But the priest is left permanently blinded to the light of this world. No longer can he read the scrolls. It is a heavy price to pay, a decision that no novitiate should make lightly. But as the priest removed his hand from the bowl of the canticle tree, invigorated by the blessed divinations bestowed upon him, he fell silent. Within a heartbeat, the 1,000 gypsy moths burst into life, and left him in a swirl of fine dust to recommence their cavort amid the sunlit leaves. The secrets of this supernatural seance were scattered in the breeze. Hey guys, it's Drew here, and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Whether you followed the guidance of Dexion to the Ancestor Glade in Falkreath, or infiltrated the Elder Scrolls library during the ultimate heist, I think it's safe to say that we were all fascinated by our encounters with the mysterious moth priests. Their cult has access to knowledge of immense power, the likes of which even the gods are not privy to. Yet we know so little about them beyond our fleeting interactions with them. In today's video, I hope to remedy that. We're going to explore all the lore we have on their esoteric order, and speculate on their true significance in Tamriel. So put on your blindfolds, coat yourself in ground canticle bark, and prepare to achieve enlightenment. First things first, what's so special about these moths? The ancestor moths are indigenous to Cyrodiil, with the exception of a few small isolated glades Tamriel-wide. At first glance, they aren't particularly noteworthy. They're gypsy moths with patterned brown wings. It's their silk, hued a striking crimson colour, that first attracted the attention of the Cyro-Nords inhabiting the Nimine region. The silk would certainly have become a commodity purely due to its coloration alone. But when the Nibonese people discovered inexplicable arcane properties inherent in the silk, a veneration for these inconspicuous moths developed. According to the Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition, for long the Cyro-Nordics had exported ancestor silks to other regions. Simple yet exotic shawls woven from the silks of an indigenous gypsy moth, and inscribed with the requisite genealogy of its buyer. This requisite genealogy is a little ambiguous, but it seems that the Nibonese humans were able to modify the silk's physical and metaphysical properties, tailoring it to the needs of the buyer based on their ancestry. It's a bizarre concept that served as the foundation of the Ancestor Moth cult. These early devotees sought to fully understand the metaphysical properties. If traces of this magic could be found in the silk, imagine the potential of the moths themselves. The pocket guide continues. Under the cult, however, ancestor and moth became synonymous. The singing and hymnal spirits of one's forebears are caught in a special silk-gathering ritual, the resource of which is used to create any manner of vestment or costume. Members of the cult could attune themselves with the moths, synergizing with them to create these silk garments. The swishing of this material during normal movement reproduces the resplendent ancestral chorus contained therein. It quickly became a sacred custom among the early Nibonese, which has persisted to the present day. These monks knew they were tapping into a power far beyond merely enchanted clothing, and soon they began experimenting with ways to bypass the weaving of silk altogether. What if the monks could commune directly with the moths using these chants and warbles? Monks of the higher orders of the cult of the Ancestor Moth are able to forego the magical ritual needed to enchant this fabric, and indeed prefer instead to wear the moths about the neck and face. They are able to attract the Ancestor Moths through the application of finely ground bark dust, gathered from the gypsy moth's favourite tree, and through the sub-vocalization of certain mantras. They must chant the mantras constantly to maintain skin contact with the Ancestor Moths, a discipline that they endure for the sake of some cosmic balance. When a monk interrupts these mantras, in conversation for example, the moths burst from him in glorious fashion every time he speaks, only to light back upon his skin when he resumes the inaudible chant. The cult of the Ancestor Moth came to the realization that these moths were not inherently intelligent and powerful, but were in tune with ethereal energies. They were somehow connected to the souls of those past. Sister Terran Arminus says, the Ancestor Moths that accompany some mystically attuned mortals are more than mere insects. They are animated by the loving spirits of the dearly departed, and may grant wisdom and awareness to those they visit. The ability of the moths to rhythmically attune themselves with spirits of the dead makes me think of the dream sleeve. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, it is believed that the dream sleeve is where the spirits of mortals end up after death. From here their souls are recycled and born anew in the mortal world. According to some unnamed developers in the Bethesda Softworks forums, the various afterlives of the Tamrielic races are just cultural perceptions of the dream sleeve. The sleeve is the same for all souls, but it can manifest differently based on the expectations of the individual or race. So while a Nord may travel to Sovngarde and seek a place in the illustrious Hall of Valor, and a Redguard may dream of flying on the wings of the lion ibis Tuwaka to the eternal sands of the far shores, the purposes of these realms are the same. Tall Papa asserts that souls in the far shores await the shedding of the old world skin before returning, while Shor, the patriarchal god of the Nords and all men, rallies his troops in Sovngarde before the great return. They are unique interpretations of the same process. Souls pass to the immortal and undefinable confines of the dream sleeve before being reborn. In the words of Mankar Cameron, we mortals leave the dreaming sleeve of birth the same, unmantled save for the symbiosis with our mothers. If the Ancestor Moths can somehow tap into the dream sleeve and access memories beyond the limits of the mortal mind, then those who can synchronize and harmonize with the moths may therefore access knowledge far greater than they could dare to comprehend. To many, this kind of enlightenment would be daunting, as it holds the potential to completely unravel one's perception of reality. But to those mad few willing to learn the mantras and take up the trill of the Ancestor Moth, a wealth of transcendental power awaits. So, the members of the cult began to study the secrets of the Ancestor Moths. The Pension of the Ancestor Moth, an initiatory pamphlet given to all novices of the cult, states that the Order of the Ancestor Moth is as ancient as it is noble. We nurture and celebrate our beloved ancestors, whose spirits are manifest in the Ancestor Moths. Each moth carries a Fieron of the ancestor's spirit. Loosely translated as the will to peace, the Fieron can be sung into the silk produced by the Ancestor Moths. Adepts of our order are gifted with prescient powers. This monastery is dedicated to the service of these noble members of our order. They now live out their lives with the Ancestor Moths that they so love. Their underground domains are well suited to the moths. They raise and nurture the fragile creatures, singing to them constantly. They harvest the silk and spin it into bolts of cloth. They weave the cloth, embroidering it with the genealogies and histories of the ancestors that spun the silk. This is their new life. Prior to the rise of the Ancestor Moth cult, the procuring and perusing of Elder Scrolls would have filled even the most ambitious emperor with trepidation. These scrolls have no known origin or author, and upon their divine parchment, one may find archives of the past, as well as auguries of the future. They are believed to be fragments of creation that exist outside of time and space, extricated from the limits of the mortal realm, beyond even the providence of the Aedra and Daedra. The ability to divine the future awaits those willing to expose their minds to this raw primordial power. But is it worth risking your sanity and your sight for cryptic prophecies that you may not even be able to understand? It seemed only natural that the Cyrodiilic Empire would seek to establish an order around the interpretation of the scrolls. And who better than the Ancestor Moth cult? Monks of this obscure order put themselves at great spiritual risk to unravel the transcendent perplexities of the moths and their silk. We know that the moths are tuned into a frequency that mortals cannot typically detect. They seem to have a connection to the spiritual realm of the Dreamsleeve, where creation proliferates without restraint. Perhaps the dedication and expertise of the monks could be applied to the reading of the Elder Scrolls. The cost of deciphering the Elder Scrolls reshaped the order of the Ancestor Moth. Communing with the moths took years of training, but reading the scrolls also demanded an immense amount of sacrifice. The text titled Effects of the Elder Scrolls gives some insight into the process of learning to read the scrolls, and the 4 groups of readers. The first group is called the Naive. For one who has received no training in the history or nature of the Elder Scrolls, the scroll itself is effectively inert. No prophecy can be scried, nor knowledge obtained. While the scroll will not impart learning to the uninformed, nor will it afflict them in any adverse fashion. Visually, the scroll will appear to be awash in odd lettering and symbols. It is the second group, the unguarded intellects, that realizes the greatest danger from attempting to read the scrolls. These are subjects who have an understanding of the nature of the Elder Scrolls, and possess sufficient knowledge to actually read what's inscribed on them. They have not, however, developed adequate discipline to stave off the mind-shattering effect of having a glimpse of infinity. These unfortunate souls are struck immediately, irrevocably, and completely blind. Such is the price for overreaching one's faculties. It bears mentioning, though, that with the blindness also comes a fragment of that hidden knowledge. Whether the future, the past, or the deep natures of being is dependent on the individual and their place in the greater spheres. But the knowledge does come. This is the part that emphasizes the true danger of interpreting the scrolls, and the gravity of the undertaking for the moth priests. It's not simply a case of being skilled or unskilled, but also one of control and discipline. Knowing how to read a scroll is not enough in itself, as without the necessary mental fortitude, the weight of the prophetic revelations written on the parchment will overwhelm the mind and blind the eyes. In the third and fourth groups, we find those with the mastery to effectively imbibe the contents of more than a single scroll, and only members of the Ancestor Moth cult have reached this degree of wisdom. The third group is the group of mediated understanding. Alone in Tamriel, it would appear that only the cult of the Ancestor Moth have discovered the discipline to properly guard one's mind when reading the scrolls. Their novitiates must undergo the most rigorous mental cultivation, and they often spend a decade or more at the monastery before being allowed to read their first scroll. With appropriate fortitude, these readers also receive blindness, though at a far lesser magnitude than the unguarded. Their vision fogs slightly, but they retain shape, colour, and enough acuity to continue to read mundane texts. The knowledge they gain from the scroll is also tempered somewhat. It requires stages of meditation and reflection to fully appreciate and express what one saw. Finally, there is the group of illuminated understanding. With continued readings, the monks become gradually more and more blind, but receive greater and more detailed knowledge. As they spend their waking hours pondering the revelations, they also receive a further degree of mental fortitude. These monks have absorbed the lore of many scrolls. Their eyesight may gradually diminish. They are deprived of the spectacle of the sun setting over the Colovian highlands, and the flutter of birds over the crystalline waters of Lake Rumer. But stored in their minds are wonders beyond the limits of vision. As wisdom is endowed on the monks, so too is reticence. The priests are privy to powerful secrets that must not be shared with society at large, for that would only bring chaos. One humorous account of the cult's privacy was recorded by a novitiate named Quintus Nerevellus. He writes, "I discovered that the moth priests are notoriously inexact when it comes to the actual physical manifestations of the scrolls, and had no idea how many they held, or how they were organised. Merely asking the question evoked chuckles, as if a child was asking why dogs cannot talk." Quintus hoped to create his own index of the Elder Scrolls, in cooperation with the monks, so that history would not repeat itself, and no more would go missing from the Imperial Library. But he found that many areas overlapped, and there were outright contradictions in the layout. In some cases, different monks would claim the same scroll to be at opposite ends of the tower. An older monk told Quintus that the scrolls did not exist in a countable form. Quintus opened a repository to see 14 scrolls filed within. The monk bid him check again, and then there were 18. There is no one way to read the Elder Scrolls. But one method developed by the Ancestor Moth cult involves, of course, the cooperation of the Ancestor Moths. In an Ancestor glade, the monk removes some bark from the canticle tree with a draw knife. The moths are attracted to the bark and the mantras chanted by the monk. Once the moths land upon the monk, their combined sight allows for the successful reading of an Elder Scroll. The most prestigious moth priests are often wizened old men, but not even the most enlightened priests can read the scrolls forever. Every member of the fourth group, those with illuminated understanding, have their last readings. There is, for every monk, a day of penultimate reading, when the only knowledge imparted by the scroll is that the monk's next reading shall be his last. For each monk, the penultimate reading comes at a different and unknowable time. Preliminary work has been done to predict the occurrence by charting the severity of an individual monk's blindness, but all who reach these later stages report that the increasing blindness seems to taper with increased readings. Some pose the notion that another unseen sense is continuing to diminish at this upper range, but such postulations are best left to philosophers. To prepare for his ultimate reading, a monk typically withdraws to seclusion in order to reflect upon a lifetime of revelations and appoint his mind for reception of his last. Upon this final reading, he is forever blinded, as sure as those unguarded ones who race to knowledge. The illuminated one, though, has retained his understanding over a lifetime, and typically possesses a more integral notion of what has been revealed to him. It is customary for these enlightened retired monks to remain aloof, taking the gradual debilitation that comes with reading the scrolls as a point of pride. Novitiates in the order are forced to find their own way. Perhaps too much guidance would weaken the willpower of those new members, putting them at greater risk of failure. Whatever the case, the wealth of wisdom stored within the minds of these old monks is worth more than an ocean of gold. In death, their spirits will traverse the veil and enter the dreaming sleeve. But even in death, they may feel the probing song of the Ancestor Moths, and through these silk-weaving conduits, a new generation of monks may be enlightened. And there you have it, guys, the cult of the Ancestor Moth and their manifold mysteries. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. I've been Drew, this has been Fudge Muppet, and I'll see you in the next one.